Hello, everyone. Welcome to Soul Sessions with Deborah and Rob at Creative Mind. How are you today, Rob?
Very well, thank you. You look beautiful as always.
Oh, so do you. You look beautiful. So I am so excited because we're starting a new series. And this series is on relationships, my favorite subject.
We have an expert here.
And we're not talking just about romantic relationships. We're talking about family relationships, work relationships, relationships with team, with clients, if you're a coach or have your own business, and relationship with yourself, which is always the best, the most important relationship of your life. And today we're going to talk about our favorite topic, the mother. And the name of our podcast today is, Did Your Mother Ruin Your Life? Did she, Rob?
Well, we're gonna answer it, and should we answer it now or wait till the end?
Let's answer it now.
Okay, I would say yes and no.
Good. That's a good segue to what we're going to talk about today.
And let's explain why we say yes and why we say no.
And so, one of the things that over the years I've worked with so many women and some men, and there seems to be a theme that every place they're stuck in their life, it always comes back to the mother, their relationship with the mother. Sure. Not always that the mother was so good so bad, but that kind of dynamic with mother-child. So let's talk about that. What is that, the mother-child relationship, and how does that really create that template for our life?
Yeah, it's a big topic, and the good thing is that there is a lot of good research on, what is going on between the mother and the child early on, and of course, then there's attachment theory, which we'll talk about as well. But in general, Freud, in the very beginning, because psychoanalysis is really the basis of Western psychology, but he saw the mother as the primary relationship for the child, meaning that it is the initial relationship that you have in life. As soon as you're born, you're connected to this individual. Even before, obviously, you're in the womb. But then as you're born, you're dependent on this incredible being to take care of you, to give you food,
keep you
comfort, keep you safe. So it's like an oceanic experience. And of course, Freud believed that we're always looking to go back there.
Back to the teat.
Back to that oceanic experience, right, of feeling
taken care of.
Completely enveloped, completely enveloped and taken care of.
Well, when I was a hypnotherapist, I was trained in prenatal regression. So we would go back into the womb, basically, with the client, and I would take them through kind of the experience, the memory, the womb memories. Right. And, you would think, there's all this trauma there. I would say 99% of them were just really beautiful. They said, I just felt so peaceful. And it's really amazing that you're a part of the mother's body. She's carrying you in her body. I mean, even if she was the most critical, evil mother that you've ever had, she carried you, she gave you life. There had to be some sort of love or caring for her to basically birth you, because she carried you in her physical body, and you're really one with her, and everything's taken care of. You have the umbilical cord, you got your food, you don't have to do anything. You're just laying back, and then as we were born, we're separated from that source. And it's almost as if like a metaphor for how we separate from the divine when we become human beings. We are one with the divine, and then we have this perception of separation, and we're always trying to get back. We're always trying to, and the mother is like a godlike creature to us that we project. Now that I'm out of the womb, you're still the source of everything. And in a way, psychologically and culturally, she is. I mean, the mother's the one who feeds you, is taking care of you most of the time in life. and you know, this idea in the culture that says my parents screwed us up is, you know, what I hear a lot from clients is, just a little background before we get into the data, is a lot of them are mothers, and they feel they don't want to be a bad mother. There's a lot of that, you know, I don't want to be a bad mother, I want to be a good mother. And it's such a conflict, because I think every mother struggles with that. And so when we think about blaming our mother for everything, that, you know, I think unless they're really damaged psychologically, like pathological, most mothers try their best, are always trying, you know, feeling like they want to do good for their children.
Yeah. So before we get into Jung, which kind of had a very different perspective on the mother and the mother archetype, the idea of, let's say, of blaming the mother, it does come from psychoanalysis, because in essence, in psychoanalysis, which is the Freudian model, which is basically a medical model, since Freud was a neurologist, he was looking for what goes wrong in his patients, right? People that become obsessive or
neurotic,
very neurotic, that they have these phobias that they, you know, there's really no reason to have. So those kind of problems, he was looking for the source of that, and obviously he went to early experiences, and it kind of stayed in that vein of thought that we're looking for some kind of initial problem, initial trauma that then caused this neuroses to appear. Whereas when we consider a coaching model, it's not necessarily that way. We're simply looking at what were the messages, the subtle messages that the individual absorbed from their experiences with the mother and with early experiences that remain unconscious unless the individual was able to examine those things. They pretty much remain in the unconscious mind and are then operating throughout their lives.
So what you're saying is that, you know, a lot of people are like, I need to find the root cause of why my life is so screwed up. And really it's like kind of, I don't know if that's a Freudian to think who to blame for it. You know, like what is that initial core incident, they call it the impactful event, that initial impactful event that, you know, screwed you up for life. And I think that life is an impactful event, being born. Sure. And all of us have had a way. So I think that's our approach is more, there's not like certain people that had this trauma that, you know, that's why their life is screwed up and you got to find the core and you got to heal that trauma. It's more from the coaching model of, you know, we're all dealing with an ego. We all have patterns that we have to deal with. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? The difference between the Freudian approach and the Jungian approach?
Not so much the Jungian, because Jung himself, I mean, was essentially, he was actually working with more severe clients or patients. His patients were psychotic. They weren't just neurotic. And so he was also a physician in a sense, looking for the source of the problem. So there's nothing wrong with that model.
Yeah.
It's simply that if we want to use some of this information about attachment, about what is going on between the mother and the child, in a coaching model, in other words, where people that aren't necessarily looking for symptom reduction or resolution to their internal conflicts, but more just a more enlightened way of being, then we can look at this information in that coaching model perspective.
And I've always found many sources of events in my life that could have formed different patterns, and our life is filled with them. So it's almost like there's this misperception that there's a perfect life, an ideal life, and that some of us get screwed up along the way. And I think all of us have to go through the challenges of life to be that form our character and form different patterns in us and our fears. I mean, just in humanity, it really is that that kind of compassion for ourselves and for the people around us that raised us, that everyone's just trying to do their best most of the time with what they, even really severely ill people, they don't have the capacity to do better, so it's like having compassion for, the state of humanity. But let's go back to these early experiences in the mother and that how they affect our life. And is it, or do we want to go into the attachment theory now? Or do you have something else you want to say before we move on?
Well, just to frame, let's say, the approach that we're taking a little bit further. So Jung then had this idea that we already have this template, which he called the mother archetype, that's innate in us. We're born with it. And then as we're born, we project it onto our biological mother. So the experience is a lot bigger than just relating to one individual.
Another human being, yeah.
Yeah, but like you were saying, it's almost like that feeling of the divine, right? I'm relating to the universe in a way when I'm relating to my mother, from the child's perspective. Because we're not reasoning at that age, right? When we're born, our first few years, we're responding and experiencing the world instinctually. Very open. We know our neurons are kind of not committed. We have an excess of neurons to kind of be ready to capture the world.
And you notice babies, they're always looking around and touching everything. And
yes. Well, that openness then allows us to adapt to any situation. Right? It's nature's way of saying, I'm going to give you the best possible chance here. I'm going to leave a lot of the neural connections open so that as you experience life, as you kind of get a sense of what am I going to expect or what can I expect in the world, then it starts to prune and define those neural connections.
So we're kind of like soft clay, and then we get hardened into a shape. The world shapes us, and we shape ourselves as well by making decisions and knowing what feels comfortable, what doesn't. So it's an exchange. It's not like someone can force you to conform to be somewhere. You had to agree on some level that was. So it's a relationship. Your relationship with your mother, that early experience is a two-way street. It's how you related and how she related, and you're kind of creating your own kind of understanding of the world. And what I love about this concept of the mother archetype, which I read when I read Jung, this concept, it really stuck out to me, is that idealized mother archetype is this pure, divine, godlike image that we project onto this little human woman.
That's a lot of pressure.
Who's just, has her own patterns and her own patterns from her mother and her mother's mother, and that generational patterns, and then cultural patterns of being a woman. And so all these things that she had to deal with, and then you're projecting this like ultimately divine thing onto this mere human and expecting her to be that way. So it's in that disappointment that you're not giving me everything I need, that also plays into the role. So what we project onto the mother and our expectations on her also create our image of her in our mind. And so we have an internal image of our mother, and we notice that everyone has a different, even in the siblings, everyone has a different internal image of their mother. So who your mother is basically your own internal image of what you decided she was based on that projection, and then your interaction, and then your relationship. So it's not that she's not an object externally that's fixed. It's a dynamic. And I find that so fascinating, because we think people are just a certain way, they're the way they are, but there's an internal image that we have that we project.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we do the same thing with everyone in life, but that that primary image is how we relate to the world and how we relate to others, and it's that kind of foundational, is the world safe from me?
Yeah, and that openness then allows for, let's say, if the mother, our biological mother, is absent, that an adopted mother can come in, and whoever really takes care of us and mothers us becomes that object of projection for us.
Could be a nanny, could be a grandmother that comes in.
But we do know from research that the baby is primed to relate to one person in the first, especially the first few months. Then you get to about a year and later, and they start to look for secondary attachments to the father, to siblings, aunts, people that are taking care of them, and then further on to the community, right, to extended families.
So what if someone was adopted, and usually adopted children, the birth mother doesn't hold the baby because they don't want the baby, if they know they're going to be adopted, to bond. But what if the mother did hold the baby for like the first couple days and then gave up for adoption? Would that change the dynamic?
I think so.
I guess it's always still a separation because you're biologically connected and then separated from her. Even if she doesn't hold you after birth, you're still feeling that sense of loss.
Yeah, my sense is the brain and our nervous system is primed to absorb every experience because it wants to give us the best chance possible.
So it doesn't just throw it away. So
exactly. Whatever happens in those early experiences are recorded in a deep cellular neuronal level, so that it prepares us for life. Basically, it's saying, if this is what I have to deal with the rest of my life, I'm going to be ready. And so we see that, yes, those early experiences, that attachment pattern with the mother and what happens in those early years are very important. They're going to have an impact whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. It's ingrained in our sense of ourselves and what we expect from the world. So
we're constantly trying to get back to that blissful ocean of bliss that we were in the womb in life. Like we want to find that security and safety again. So that's what the ego's trying to reconnect with. So what the mother does, even if she isn't perfect outside of the womb, inside, she created the environment for you for the most part, unless there was something really terrible like drug abuse and all that stuff. But for the most part, we're talking about like a healthy, natural.
The majority of people, we all kind of, if we managed to get this far, somebody probably took care of us.
Yeah, we weren't left out. And it's true, like babies, you can't, like they're not like puppies that can make their way and find scraps. Babies can't even walk, so they're really helpless. So there had to be someone to love them. Actually just read a story about a little boy that was left in the subway in New York, and it was like 18 years later. He's going to college, but a gay guy found him heard a baby crying, and it was like in a box, and he saved it, and it became his son, and just the kind of that he was his mother, like that wonderful experience. So even if you're left, there's always someone there to find you and take care of you. So
yeah, there's a whole these case studies of feral children who were thought to be raised by animals, or pretty much survived in wild situations on their own. Fascinating, but we'll do that on another call.
Yes. So when we talk about the mother, a lot of what comes to is Bowlby's theory on attachment.
John Bowlby, which is a British psychologist, and Mary Ainsworth did a lot of the work on what happens in those early years as far as attachment patterns.
And so a lot of people that use the attachment patterns are using it in more of a therapy model of something dysfunctional happened in the attachment, but we're going to use it more in a coaching model.
Yes. And our reasoning for that is that there's been a call since the 80s for a positive psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And we're simply including in that positive perspective, meaning looking not only at psychology as a way to fix people or to help people through traumatic experiences and mental health issues, but let's say the typical individual, who is functioning fairly well, but could use a lot of this information.
Which is what, 90% of the population?
Yes, to help them develop their lives to their utmost potential, relationships, work, meaning, all that. And we know life is so challenging now, right? It's stressful. It changes very rapidly. We need all the tools we can get. We need those psychologies. And depth psychology just goes a little bit deeper than a lot of the, let's say, the academic psychology that looks more at behavior and thought patterns. So
would attachment theory be depth? A little bit of depth?
It kind of falls in between because it's
you could use it in behavior, or you could use it
that's right.
as a Jungian
because approach. You are dealing with emotions and very early experiences, so you're kind of using those psychodynamic models to look at what's going on there. So
let's talk about it. The attachment theory, just a brief overview.
Yeah, so the basic idea is that those early experiences do form the way you then expect to attach and relate to others as you grow up into adulthood. And you learn that initially from the mother. Yes. And everything before you go into that is everything that we have in life is based on our relationship with it. So we have a relationship with people at work, we have relationships with people in our family, we have relationship with siblings, parents, children. So there's a lot of dynamic, all these relationships in our life that we have to manage, and how we interact with others really begins with the mother. Yeah. We learn how close we can get to people. Very much so. And the basic idea here is simple. That if you don't examine your early experiences, right? If you don't go back and say, okay, well, what kind of experiences did I get, and what is my attachment pattern? Mm-hmm. That early experiences, that early attachment pattern is going to remain with you for the rest of your life. And that's where your mother can ruin your life. That's where your mother can ruin your life. But the good news is it's malleable. But you have to do that internal work. You have to consciously shift. Yes, you have to provide your own pattern in basically, or a more enlightened pattern. Choose. Yes, where you are able to choose in a conscious way. Because if you don't give your mind anything new, it simply has no option but to go back to its default mode of what I learned early on. And you might be happy with it, the way it's playing out. I mean, that's fine. But even then, I would think that people would want to choose, right, in a conscious way. Even if, you want to be more, you don't want to just, if your default's working okay, like one of the is like kind of like avoidant, we'll talk about them but you could be like, you know what, I don't need to change. I like being away from I don't like to have a lot of relationships. I like to be by myself, and but you're really not choosing it. You're choosing it because it's easy. It's the default. And so whenever it's the default, it's not a choice. Even if you like it, it's not a choice. And so you have to look deeper. When we used to love programs all the time. We'd have people coming up to us and saying, I'm not looking for a relationship right now. And we were like, okay, why do you need to tell us that? And it's like that defense of, I'm choosing that, but they're really not, because there's something that, why do they have to come up to us and tell us that they really aren't choosing, but they're saying they are. So that's a really good point. It's like, are we choosing the default, or we are just feeling like we can't change it? So we just, basically, I guess there's a way we say, kind of, our mind make it okay. What is that called? The defense?
that you just kind of minimize it and say it's just the way it is, and you kind of minimizing, yeah.
So yeah, the research shows that most of us, about 60% of people, fall into the category of a secure attachment style, which means about 40% don't. But if you have a secure attachment style, it doesn't mean you're not going to have emotional challenges or breakups and drama in your relationships. It just simply means you're going to be able to bounce back. You're more resilient. You're able to kind of bend with the flow of
it doesn't
situations.
Ruin your life, basically. Like where an avoidant, these other styles that are insecure, we can have tendencies to be like that at certain periods, but it's not our home. Basically, like it's not at the spectrum of it's so extreme. Is that what it would be?
Yes.
Like we still have, all of us have a tendency to be needy at times or avoidant at times, but the insecure person, it's so like it's almost like extreme where
it's extreme, and it's kind of the go-to pattern, right? Whereas
they're really stuck in it.
Yeah, so most of us might feel vulnerable in some situations, and that's normal. But let's say the insecure person or the avoidant person, the fearful person that has these kind of insecure attachment styles, that's their go-to pattern, meaning they always feel insecure and fearful when
they don't have the capacity to have any kind of it's like almost like there's no other option.
Right.
Where a secure person can have both. Like, at work I'm really good with people, but when I get into romantic relationships, it's a little weird. Or when I'm fine around my husband, but when I get around my family, it's kind of neurotic or something. Or all these things show up in different ways. But in this, when you're really locked in the insecure, it's almost like that's everything. That's the only way you can function. So when we say these other things, you may say, "Ooh, that sounds like me a little bit." So I want to preface this by saying it doesn't mean you're insecure. It means that you have some of these tendencies, and I think we all do. Yeah. Because when you read them to me when we first met, I was like, I think I'm this, but I think I'm that too. I could be all of them, because we've all had experiences and different situations and different times in our life where we feel really confident, and we show up differently than when we.
And different people are going to elicit different responses from you.
Yeah. So like if you're avoidant, someone who's really grabby with you you're going to have a different experience than someone else who's avoidant. You might feel like maybe even closer to that person or more comfortable than someone who's needy around you. So it's really what their dynamic is. So it's a dynamic experience.
Absolutely.
So let's go through the three. There's avoidant, preoccupied, and ambivalent. So the avoidant is dismissive and fearful. So is this the person that is just saying, I don't want to be really engaged, the kind of isolated person?
Yeah, it can be. But it is that basically that you don't feel you need that relationship. You don't feel you feel independent, and when it comes to intimacy and relationships, you'd rather not, right? You'd rather be home with a book than be out looking for a relationship or experiencing kind of that intimacy that most people look for. So
like the example of I'm not looking for a relationship right now would be more the avoidant, but they think they're choosing it. Again, they think, but that's just their pattern of avoiding.
Yeah.
Would it happen circumstantial too? Say someone had an intimate relationship, a breakup, and then they decided, I'm out. I'm opting out of this love thing? Or do you think it's more that was formed from the mother and then?
Let's say in the pure model, these patterns would be unconscious. The individual doesn't think it through. In other words, they're not thinking,
I'm avoidant.
Yeah, I'm avoidant, or I want to avoid relationships. They kind of find rationales, reasons why, and it makes sense to them. Just I'm not interested, or I'm focused on my career, that kind of stuff.
And so then the next one is preoccupied, highly emotional, and reactivity. So this is, I think I was this stage at one point in my life in my 20s, just being so obsessed with finding love.
Yeah.
And like and up and down emotionally, and like, oh my God, is he going to call? And then where's the next man? And I like reading, a lot of books and trying to like find that love, and like very preoccupied with, I didn't even care about career. It was like love, love, love. I need it. And then also that preoccupation with, what is everyone thinking about me? And, Mary's mad at me, my friend, and kind of like everything is so intense in a relationship.
Yeah. And just to connect it to early experiences, right? These would be kind of defensive strategies in response to that relationship with the mother.
So that grasping. So maybe the mother was a little more. Maybe the mother was avoidant and the child was grasping.
Whatever worked for the child in that situation, right?
Like if I get really needy, my mother will pay attention to me.
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, if you're preoccupied with relationships and you're kind of oversensitive to reading people's cues, are they rejecting me or do they like me? You're kind of very invested in like me. That's that preoccupation with or preoccupied attachment style. So
also too, would that be the mother being that way too, where you kind of learn that pattern through her?
Kind of like the parent might be withholding affection, right, as a way of disciplining the kid. So she might say, "Oh, I don't like you if you're acting bad," and so the kid might get the impression that, let's say love and affection depends on me being the good person.
Yeah, and we all have that in a way. We all worry about what we do, or is that someone going to leave us if we do the wrong thing?
Yes, and then you see those patterns amplified in adults, right? They play out in our relationships and our work habits and all that. Then the ambivalent one is kind of the person that's all over the place. They might be secure in some situations, fearful and avoidant in others, and preoccupied.
So you get a mixed.
Yes.
I feel like I was ambivalent when I look at this, because when a guy was really needy for me, I was cold and let him get away. But then when they weren't interested, I was like obsessed with every text they send me. So it was kind of like that mixture. And then in a way, we really, like you said, it's a defense. You really don't want, you're always seeking the attention of someone who's not going to give it back in a way.
Yes, that could be one of the patterns that plays out.
And there's so many ways. But when we think about the mother, how would a child basically creates these attachment styles based on that early bonding with the mother?
Yeah.
And so what worked for you in that dynamic? And it's not, would it be not really blaming the mother, because the mother's going to be the way she could be one way with every kid, and each child has their own attachment style to the mother?
Well, absolutely. And then you have to consider the larger context of what we know about genetics and epigenetics, and all that plays into the way the mother responds to the child, and then the way the child responds to the mother as well. In other words, genetics is kind of pre-programmed stuff, right? We come into the world with a certain level of intelligence, a certain predisposition, personality, all that. That's going to play into that relationship. I used to work in the hospital, and I'd go to the nursery ward sometimes, and I could tell each little kid has already, in the first few days of life, they already have a personality. Like some you feel a bond with, or you feel that kind of friendliness towards, and others, they're more difficult to get close to, and those kind of things.
Oh, yeah. So they already have that genetic disposition to have these styles.
Yes.
And then the mother can also interact with the child based on that. So, wow.
Yes, right.
But again, just because it's genetic doesn't mean it's permanent.
No, not at all. I think nature gives us that flexibility so that we can work with it all the time. I mean, anytime. And then epigenetics is more interesting in the regards that now not only our parents' experiences are passed down to us, but our grandparents and great-grandparents, and even further down, their experiences, what the wars that they went through,
depression. I was telling you, my grandmother went through the depression, but my mother was born after it. But she still was raised by a mother who went through a depression. So the way she thinks about money, the way she looks at, nurturing. And my grandmother had like 12 children. Not all of them survived. They had 2 deaths. And it was just, she loved being a mom and, all that. Like, the kids are the best. Your purpose is to nurture children. And so she kept having them. And so that was imprinted in my mom. And then, she carried on those same patterns.
Yeah. And so we have to take everything into consideration. Everything we let's say all the information we have about human development and culture and genetics and epigenetics, and look at the individual in that context. That it's not a one thing that we're looking for. That all these factors are playing into. But luckily, let's say if we stay in the moment and we say, okay, what's going on now? We can pretty much find a way to help individuals move forward in their attachment styles. Yeah, because the way they are responding now in the moment, or in the current situation with their relationships, that contains all the information you need to know to be able to help that individual.
Well, that's what I was going to get to, because someone said, well, what about this type of mom, a helicopter negligent mom? And it's like, there's no, like, a helicopter mom is going to have give this kind of attachment style, what you're saying. So instead of focusing on what your mom was doing, you can basically look at your life right now and look at your relationships and say, do I avoid relationships? Am I overly obsessed with keeping relationships and being really needy and always being highly emotional when people don't call me back, and always trying to keep it, those people that always try to keep in touch with everybody, and they're always like, going through their speed dial and getting those connections and that kind of needing all that attention? Or are you, like, sometimes with certain people needy, sometimes not? Or are you just, relationships are just, not really that impactful? But I think we all have a piece of those little styles in us. And so they're maybe not extreme, but we want to look at, what is our relationship with others? How close do we allow people? And how much are emotions and self-worth measured by others?
Yeah.
Right. That kind of, if they, are we always needing others' approval and acknowledgement?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's where we found the Jungian model of the psyche very useful, because if you think about these experiences, they were absorbed unconsciously, right? We weren't thinking through, oh, how am I going to relate to my mother today? Should I cry or should I not? And all that. We were just responding instinctually to situations. But our body, our brain, our mind was absorbing all that information and storing it. It was integrated into our organism, in a sense. So now, in order to change that, the only model that we saw that really addresses the unconscious mind in a creative way, let's say in a positive, non-fixing way, was Jung's work and his individuation model, which individuation, we can think of it as our ability to really find who we are and express that sense of ourselves from our own choosing, instead of from the conditioning of the culture and all that biology that we were talking about, the genetics and epigenetics, those things are very powerful, and they form the way we see ourselves in the world. But if we can change it, we can change it based on the Jungian model, because we know that's kind of on the surface. In other words, the way we're expressing our persona, our personality, our conditioning is at the conscious level. We're doing it kind of to fit in,
which is what we did as a children. We had how do I survive in this environment?
Yes.
With this person, what are the rules that she's, for me to not piss her off and like have her keep feeding me and keep her love.
Yeah.
And maybe it's don't cry, don't cry, don't make a fuss. And that's how mom is nice to me. But when I make a fuss, mom is mad. So I'm going to learn, even non-verbally, that, what? I'm going to stuff my feelings. So a lot of that. And then so we then create the persona of someone who it's not okay to express your feelings. And then in Jung's work, the shadow would be someone who's highly emotional. And so we see people that are like corporate and professional, and they're all locked up, and they're trying to like change their life and maybe even meet a romantic partner, but they don't have that. They can't get the emotion going, and they wonder what that happens with. And so that would be an example. Not always, like everyone's unique. Like, here's a question, and maybe you can answer that before we go to how to transform. Why would anyone develop that avoidant, fearful way of being? And I think it's because when you're not sure of how people are going to respond to you, sometimes the best thing is, like I said, is to shut down. Yeah. It's like, I function better. And we don't do it because we want it to connect. We do it to survive. And so when we're with the mother dynamic, it's all about survival. I mean, we want to connect and we want to stay connected, but ultimately, if it's not safe, we want to survive.
That's a good point.
And she could be preoccupied with her, having 20 kids, and, she's not giving you the attention. And maybe the only way you got to attention is when you fell or you got into trouble, and then mom would pay attention to you, and so you start to learn, I'm going to be this little trickster in life.
Yeah, there's a lot of all those factors that we mentioned play into it, or can play into it. Because if you notice, children who grow up in the same household can have very different approaches to relationships. And they might be even close in age, or they might be even twins. They've done twin studies, and one of them develops like maybe a secure attachment style while the other one doesn't. What's going on there? Well, it has to do with the subjective interpretation of the child. Because every child is going to interpret the mother's behavior in their own subjective way.
So when we transform this relationship, I think the first step is to don't get preoccupied with blaming the mother. And taking responsibility, because now that because if you blame your mother and hate her and have to forgive her and all that stuff, that's okay, but you're still giving her the power and saying that you screwed up my life. And when you say that, it actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when you claim, you're saying, you know what, she did her best. Maybe it wasn't the best that I would want, but she did her best. And now it's time for me to move on and choose my life.
Yeah, so it begins with that self-inquiry, right? That the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates, what he means is that if you don't take the time to examine your life and really rework it in a conscious way, you're simply going to be playing out those pre-programmed conditioned patterns the rest of your life, because you're not giving your mind anything new. You're simply saying, that's as good as it gets. And
this is the way I am because my mother screwed me up. For me, for years, I said, well, I have trouble with men because of my father, the way he was. And that didn't help me, blaming him. And when I realized that I chose also the dynamic, everything started to shift right away, where I took responsibility for my part in that dynamic, and then actually changed our relationship. I mean, our early life relationship had changed. So you can actually, so many times we've heard our clients tell us, my relation with my mother is so different now after I've done this work. It's like really going into taking that responsibility and examining your life and saying, what do I want to create now? Okay, was the template that was given to me, the system the default operating system. It's time for an upgrade, and I could change it, and I could choose who I want to become. And so part of it is dropping the judgment of the mother, of what she did. Because if a lot of times people tell me, wow, I think about it now, and she had, so many kids, or she was worried about money, and like, you don't know what was going on in her life. And, to look back from adulthood into childhood and think, you remember it completely. You don't remember the subtle things, and she probably didn't communicate her pain or her struggle or her things that she was dealing with. So we have to just drop the judgment and know that she was trying to do her best, the best she could. Yes. Not to dismiss cruel, and we know there are some cruel mothers out there.
But even then, because if you understand conditioning and these genetic and epigenetic forces, really, then you start to see individual behavior very differently. People are not really acting out of free will and free choice. They're acting out of their that momentum of conditioning that's passed down generation after generation. How can you blame
who do you blame?
people?
Like Eve, the first human.
That's right. And so the good news is simply this, that we can free ourselves from that conditioning. That's what Jung's individuation model is about. It's about that self-inquiry so that we can free our mind from past conditioning. Not by pushing it away, not by denying it, but by understanding
or minimizing
its nature. Yeah, that it is out of conditioning, that it is there to protect you in essence, right? The first principle is to survive. So, did we survive? Yeah, we got here. The second one is to fit into society, to develop a persona that is acceptable for the world.
And a lot of times those are in conflict.
Yes, but we made it somehow, right? If you're here, you survive. You might not have the best persona or the best life that you want.
I think I have the best persona. Just kidding.
But it was good enough to get us here.
Yeah,
right?
It worked.
Yes.
And it's flexible. The persona is just the mask, and it's a very light mask. But if we identify with it, it does feel consistent. But we can be flexible, and we know this because there's a personality we have at work. There's a personality we have with our family. There's a personality we have with our friends, our lovers, our children. We teachers. We're always having all these faces that we wear. And it's all based on how do I basically adapt to this situation and save face, basically.
Yeah, and dropping the judgment is important because that's what holds that conditioning in place.
By
right?
pushing it away.
That the mind is judging and saying, if I don't defend myself, right, then the bad thing will happen. I'll be abandoned. I'll be lost. Because the child was in a vulnerable situation that they needed the parent to take care of them. And so the whole emphasis, all the energy was going towards, I have to be accepted by the mother so that she can protect me and take care of me. But now we don't need that.
It's interesting that you're saying that is, I think, if you don't do it, something will show up to force you to do it. And what I've seen a pattern with many of my clients and people I've known over the years, even friends that had aging parents, and they have a really terrible relationship with their mother. Like, oh, my mother was terrible. She was so critical, blah, blah, blah. Like, really negative. And then they had to take care of the mother. The mother got sick. They were the only ones there. And basically there was this kind of healing of that relationship. and they had to come to term. They had first of all resented that they had to take care of their mother when they felt like their mother didn't take care of them. But there was something about that situation that was very healing for them and very beautiful. And so all of them came out of it as like, this is the most incredible healing experience I had. But we don't want to wait till that day. We want to be able to reclaim that a healthy relationship with our mother now, before she gets sick and before she and then those of you who've lost their mothers, we want to kind of let them free them from that heavy judgment.
Yeah, so somebody asked, what about narcissistic mothers? And this is our own approach to these kind of questions. So you probably won't find it in textbooks or anything like that. We don't like these labels because they kind of dehumanize people, right? By saying, you're narcissistic or you're a narcissist or all these, they sound clinical. They sound like, they have some validity, but human beings are not that simple, right? Let's say we're
slap a label on.
Yeah. When we act in narcissistic ways, we're acting in egoistic ways. Yeah. Our behavior is not the best, right? We're not doing our best. We're not really conscious and expressing the best in human nature. But we all do it. In other words, we all start out kind of being self-centered and egoistic and developing that self-centeredness as a way of surviving, and a way of taking care of ourselves. Some people do get stuck there. Some people do have more issues with it. But in essence, we want to look at human beings as their potential.
And clinically, narcissism is primarily a male
yes, but
disorder. There are some women, but yeah.
Yes, but what
it's more of a clinical disorder, and
it's a clinical disorder, and it should not be made lightly unless that person really is, let's say, very pathologically narcissistic and has been diagnosed, and people are trying to help them with those.
I think people throw those labels around, and it's not your fault that it's out there in the ether of internet land of everyone just using these terms.
That's right.
And then the person, I love that what you just said about dehumanizing them.
Yes.
Because even someone with a disorder shouldn't be dehumanized either, because a lot of times they can't. If they're mentally ill, they can't control that.
That's right.
Like you say, when you were working with kids with autism, to call them autistic, they're not autistic. They're children that have autistic behaviors or tendencies, but who they are as a human being.
Yes. And even if they have been diagnosed as having a narcissistic personality disorder, it is then you want to see them as needing help, right?
Yeah.
Not to accuse them, but they need help.
They're evil and they're trying to hurt you. That's
yes.
the intent. I was one of my clients once was talking about her narcissistic husband, and I said, well, if he was diagnosed, which he was, I said to her, well, imagine that he was in a wheelchair and he was handicapped, and would you think he's bad because he can't walk, or that this person doesn't have the capacity to love and to nurture, and it's kind of sad. And yes, it's sad that we had to deal with it, but you don't need that to label, for you to feel that they intended to harm you. I think that's the real freedom, is that even someone who's ill doesn't have an intent to harm, even if they do cause harm, because they're not capable of anything else. Yeah. And that's really, I think, where dropping the judgment comes in.
That's right? Where it comes in, and it's for our benefit, really. If we're able to really see people in this light of seeing them as, well, they're doing their best given their epigenetic conditioning, and maybe they made mistakes, maybe they're exhibiting some of these behaviors that we call narcissism, then we can still be compassionate. We can still forgive them, and it's for our benefit. We know that if we hold on to anger, resentment, that doesn't hurt them, it hurts us.
Can I ask a question about projection too? Like as a child too, what we put in our shadow, would we end up projecting that onto the mother?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Do we project our shadow onto our mother?
The shadow can be projected onto anybody. Absolutely.
Yeah. So as adults, we may see we have a relation with the mother, and then we start projecting, still continuing to project the things that we push away onto the mother, onto other relationships. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so the key really is to face the unconscious, which the first step is always shadow work. And what are we repressing or denying about ourselves, our own personality, that we weren't allowed to express because of that mother-daughter dynamic or mother-son dynamic? And not to blame the mother, but to choose. You chose your security safety kit to survive in the world, and so your little personality survival, what wasn't allowed to be expressed, and we need to reintegrate that into our life. So if your mother was mean and you decided, I'm going to be super nice because I don't want to be like my mother, it's about how does that limit your life? How do we integrate that projection, like my mother's mean, and I can't be mean because my mother was terrible. I need to see how that limits me and integrate that into my life. Not that you need to be mean, but where does that limit your expression? Where does that dynamic, those labels stop you?
Yeah, so following the individuation path, then individuals get to a point, once they've integrated some of their shadow work or some of their shadow, dealing with a mother archetype. And we've seen from our own practice in coaching people through individuation that at the heart of many people's individuation process is that relationship with the mother archetype. It is a big part of kind of coming to terms with who am I and what can I expect from the world.
And so this mother archetype, we project onto our human mother, and then we carry that identity or that kind of perspective in ourselves. But when we do shadow work, then we're free of that just limited, just that's the mother, and we connect to a bigger picture of the mother, which is the anima mundi, which is the soul of the world, is the mother. Our bodies become our mother. Everything material in the world becomes our mother. And there's actually a practice in Buddhism, like where they say, like everyone's your mother, basically. Like there's an aspect of all of us. So there's this really divine aspect of mother. And she was basically a human kind of stand-in for you as you early in life. And it's a beautiful, I mean, what a burden it is for the mother to carry that for a child. And so I want to go back to this, our mothers out there who are mothers. We have mothers and we have children, and the mothers that are really hard on themselves. You know, they hear this and they're like, oh my God, I'm screwing my kids up, and they're going to have an insecure attachment style, and how can I prevent that? And how can I have healthy children because I have this baggage from my mother? What would you say to our mothers out there for themselves to be empowered, and how raising children, because you worked with children and families for many, many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the definition of love is the willingness to screw it up. You know, a good parent is simply saying, I know I'm not going to be perfect at this. I know I'll probably mess it up, but I'm willing to try and I'm willing to stay with it. You know, or if I've made mistakes in the past, I'm willing to learn and retry and stay with it. That kind of staying, that kind of being there for the kid, that's the best mother, really. And
actually, that's a good point, because if you present to your children that you're perfect, they have this expectation, I have to be perfect like my mother. You know, I have to be just so good. And the mother to be more basically transparent a little bit. I mean, keeping the authority, of course, but you want to be transparent. I'm like, I'm doing my best here. I'm struggling. Mommy's struggling today. I'm worried about my mom. She's sick. This is what's going on with me. Telling the children what's going on and being human around them, it helps them realize, what, life is not about perfection. It's not about doing everything right all the time. Although we do need those structure and guidelines, but we, to behave and all those things that you don't want to leave it wide open for the child, but that flexibility to make mistakes and fall down and be okay. It's okay. You are not bad. You did something bad, but you are not bad. And if we can kind of look at our mothers that way, is that she's not, the essence of her isn't bad or evil. Maybe something she did were not perfect, but who she is in the soul level is divine. Mm-hmm. And to see our mothers as divine and see ourselves as divine in the world, no matter how much we screw up our relationships, that is really the essence of power. And then that's where really we can begin to create our life in a new way. We're not tied to those the rigid society morals that everyone tells us we need to be in order to be liked and approved of. So a couple more questions. Can avoidance type and neediness type flip? I see people who are on the surface, they're that way, but the shadow is neediness. It's almost like the avoidance is defending the neediness to come out. It could be, that's ambivalent. That would be the ambivalent type. They flip. They go back and forth depending on, they put the neediness in their shadow in certain situations, and then they put the avoidance in their shadow in certain situations.
Yeah.
And it seems like the devouring mother would have kids that are rebellious. Not always. Sometimes devouring mother have devouring children. They feel like they're that kind of needing the same. So every individual is different. That's how what we create in our life is our mother's a piece of it, but we're the other piece. So we have to say she didn't do anything to us. She performed something and we responded to it, and that dynamic is what we created our pattern from.
Yeah, the devouring mother can kill the child's will to live, not in a physical way, but in
like not take risks.
Yeah, not where the child doesn't feel that they can go out into the world and create their own life. They're always attached and somehow, and so it's.
Yeah, I see people that they're constantly, think about your relationship with your mother. Are you constantly asking her, is my mother going to approve of this? Does she, always checking in with her? And that kind of I wouldn't say too close, but it's almost like that too codependent on each other, that it's like you're not letting that relationship gets kind of in the way of you making your own decisions or being your own person.
Yeah.
And we do need to break away from our mother. The boys, they do it naturally because they're boys, because they're not identified. But for women, a lot of times they feel that since they're women, they kind of hang on a little longer. And so part of individuation is becoming an individual apart from the daughter that your mother created, and making that conscious choice of who you want to become. And it's not rejecting the mother, but it's becoming your own woman.
Yeah.
We could talk about this for hours. There's so much.
There's a lot to that,
Yeah.
But I wouldn't diminish, let's say, a man's response to the mother. Because
no. But don't you think it's easier for him to break away? Or
I don't think so.
It's about the same?
About the same.
Okay.
Maybe the challenges might be a little bit different, but I think everyone has to deal with the mother archetype somehow.
Well, I just always, in Jungian, they always talk about the father is more of a tie to the son than the mother, but the mother is always the primary.
That's right.
And especially with men, that's how they relate to women. It's like their wife becomes their mother, basically that same relating pattern that they learned from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a simple way, think in terms of it gives you that sense of who you are and what you can expect from the world. Is the world going to be responsive to you?
The world is your mother in a macro way.
That's right. Yeah. at the archetypal level. That's what we're talking about, that it's the way you experience life, right?
Your relationship with your mother reflects will teach you your relationship to the world.
Yes. And again, the good news is you can always transform it. You can always evolve it. You can always expand that relationship in a conscious way.
And I also think, too, that we overlook that if we love our mothers and they did a great job, it doesn't mean they didn't teach us things that aren't really helpful for us. So there may be some tendencies that you would think, oh, I love because she's that way, like the perfect mother or the nurturing mother. You may think, I always have to be that way in order to feel like a good person. And so that can limit us as well. So even good qualities can limit us in our life. So not only looking at the critical mothers and the devouring mothers, the narcissistic mothers and all the labels that we have for them, also looking at a perfect relationship with your mother. You think, I have no problem at all. She's the best mother in the world, but maybe she taught me some things that aren't going to lead me to where I want to be. Yeah. Maybe there's some things that you're not seeing about yourself that you are basically by default not choosing.
Yes, and just today, families and mothers are under incredible pressure and strain. A lot of, let's say, we need to, as a society, we need to support them. We need to help families survive, right, and stay together and all that.
Well, there's a lot of blended families now, and stepchildren, and sharing, not being with the mother 7 days a week. There's a split, especially when they're little. And
yes, so just in our everyday life, we just need to start thinking, how can we support mothers, families, kids, because they really are the foundation of society, of culture, of all the good stuff that we consider.
None of us would be here if we didn't have a mother. We wouldn't have a humanity. Yeah. So the mothers birth humans into the world, and it's a beautiful job. It's the toughest job in the world. The more compassion we can have for our mother, the more compassion we can have for ourselves and our own shortcomings and our own mistakes. And I think this makes the world just better if we could just have compassion for the flaws and not uphold people to standards that are impossible, that we did as kids. We put our mother into impossible standards, that you're going to be everything for me. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, I'm going to write a book about you when I'm 40 and tell you, or, write a sitcom about it. I don't know. Anyway, this is a great conversation, and we're going to continue with our series. We're going to talk about love relationships, father relationships. I think next week we're talking about this phrase I never heard before that you told me, and it's called father hunger, which I'm excited to talk about. So father hunger. So that'll be next week, and then we're going to do some more love, more work, and other romantic relationships, personal relationships. If you would love to join us on our Facebook group, it's Jungian Life Coaching with Creative Mind. We'd love to see you there. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify. We also are on YouTube. If you're on our channel right now, make sure you click the subscribe button below, and make sure you do not miss any of our live sessions that we do every week here on Fridays at noon Pacific, and bring you some soul sessions live. And we're glad to answer your questions and enjoy every week when we do this.
Thanks for all the great comments and questions.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And we appreciate all your presence here and your willingness to open your mind to something new. And to all our mothers out there, we love you. Take care.
See you next time.
Bye-bye. Take care.